Ho, 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 and Merry Christmas to the interwebs. This is Jay Dizzle coming to you live on YouTube for my what is now basically just a one time per year YouTube live stream to talk about my top games of the year. Of course, if you have watched my channel or listened to my podcast in the past, you'll know that I used to have this podcast called the World Map Podcast with some friends, and we would meet weekly, and we put out quite a few episodes and had a decent little following. We had some pretty cool guests, a couple of semi-famous guests, even I might add, during the run of the show. But now I certainly do that kind of stuff a lot less because I have children and job responsibilities and all those fun adulting things. And on top of that, I just play way less video games than I used to for sure because of all those things and also prioritizing other things like people in my life that I care about and going to the gym and trying to pack on some muscles and those sorts of things. Different things become more fun as you get older, I guess, but I still love video games. They're still fun for the right ones. It's just that there aren't nearly as many that click with me anymore these days. I think there's a lot about modern gaming that just mm, isn't for me as somebody who grew up in that kind of Nintendo Entertainment System era of gaming and then experienced, Super Nintendo and N64 and all the way on up. And I've always kind of had the latest and greatest consoles and a nice beefy PC, and I dabble in a lot of things, but it takes a lot for a game to stick with me these days. I'm not too big into the live service games that are out there and those sorts of things that are happening nowadays in gaming. I like a good dusted off play through in about 10 hours or less sort of game. A game that is fun, is a little challenging, and maybe even requires a little bit of strategy and thinking, and that respects my time. Of course, some folks will know that I was very heavy into Dota 2 for many years, which I still think is probably one of the best games ever created from a pure strategy game standpoint. Very fun, but that game did not respect your time, requires a lot of you. Basically, it's like having a part time job and taking a college course at the same time to keep up with the meta and all of the new releases that come out in terms of the patches and things. And also, the community is just very toxic and weird. And I cut that out a long time ago. And that cut down my game time dramatically too. I was looking at my stats from this past year across the different platforms. Nintendo Switch, my children, I don't know, they played that way more than I did. I barely touched my Switch this year, based on looking at the end of year wrap ups that they send out and which games were the most popular and those sorts of things. PlayStation 5, I'll talk about a little bit, but I didn't touch that much this year either. I even suspended my Xbox Game Pass subscription for most of this year. Didn't touch much on the Xbox. Of course, I play Xbox through PC. There's not really a point in owning an Xbox the last several years. And then the vast majority of the gaming that I did do was on PC or Steam Deck this year. And in fact, you'll see what is a very heavy Steam Deck list actually, and I'll talk about that when I get to those games, which ones I played and on what console or platform. But without further ado, I want to keep this video short. I want to just do a really quick hit, try to say one or two lines about each game from this year. And really this is not a comprehensive list of everything I played this year, but it's almost comprehensive because again, this is the least I've gamed ever probably in my life. It was 2024 and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. I did a lot of other very cool things this year that were really awesome. And like I said, I just don't feel sucked in by a lot of the games these days. But I'm going to talk about a few that were really fun that I really enjoyed this year, and I hope that if you haven't played them, you'll give them a try. If you're just looking for something to have a quick hit of fun, pass a little bit of time, and I'd love to hear what other folks think in the comments in terms of which of these games you played this year, where you agree, where you disagree. Get a conversation going there. Of course, many folks will know that I'm very active as well on the DLC community. That's Jeff Kanata and Christian Spicer's podcast, along with Lana Bashinsky and a few other regular guests, and then of course they have some guests that come in and out each week as well. But very active in the community of patrons who support that show. And so, of course, mostly this video is for those folks to generate a little conversation and have some fun talking to those people. But there were some other subscribers to the World Map podcast, and then maybe some random internet person will stumble across the archived version of this live stream and check it out and get something out of it. Maybe if you're looking for a new game to try, I will say my 2024 list will be very different, I think, at least from the top five up, probably from most of the lists that you've heard out there this year, at the Game Awards or on other podcast shows or whatever. My list will be a little different and probably tend to skew a little on the indie side even. But without further ado, again, let's jump into it. Want to be pretty quick here. I'm going to do a few honorable mentions first. I won't spend too much time talking about each one of these honorable mentions, but the one that I want to start with first is Akimbot. Akimbot. So Akimbo as a term. This is Akimbot, and this is basically like a Ratchet and Clank style uh, clone game. So this is made by the same people who make Pumpkin Jack, which was a very PS2 inspired platformer that I loved a couple of years ago. Now Akimbot, they're back again. They're doing sort of that mascot platformer genre thing and cloning a little bit from previous franchises that you might recognize, and it's just a ton of fun. It's got the shooting and the different weapons and the platforming and just lots of bleeps and bloops and blops exploding all over the place. And it's just pure fun. It's very linear. You're just going from one end of the level to the other and playing with all the toys that they give you along the way. And I definitely recommend checking out Akimbot. I want to spend a little more time with it someday. I haven't beaten it. I've beaten very few of the games on this list, by the way. I've had to sort of dabble a few hours here and there this year, but I always enjoy trying some of these experiences and just seeing the art and the stories and the fun gameplay loops that the creators are coming up with out there. My other honorable mentions include UFO 50, which is a game that is actually 50 game cartridges in one. Many of them seem Atari or NES era inspired, but there's some cool stuff going there in terms of how some of the things that you do within some of those games interrelate to each other. There are a few secrets to be had. And while I didn't necessarily fall in love with any one of the experiences in UFO 50, on the whole, it's a great little value for the cost. Gives you a lot of neat little things to try. And I think you'll at least find one or two very delightful experiences in UFO 50 that you'll want to keep coming back to. In particular, for me, there's one called Party House where there's a roster that you can put in your Rolodex, and you basically hire people to your party based on your popularity. Some characters give you popularity, some give you money. Money allows you to expand the size of your house so you can throw bigger parties. And it's all about before the number of parties that you're allotted in any given scenario run out. It's all about throwing parties with the right people to get the right blend of money and popularity to meet the win condition, which is to have a guest who's a star level guest, and then to get 4 stars in each level. So you have 4 star level guests for 4 stars by the end of the last party. And you can only hire those people when your popularity gets high enough. And it's just a cool little math in your head game. There's a little bit of random number generation going on there that puts a little element of luck to it, but there's some skill too. And I think UFO 50 for me was worth it to play Party House. I love Party House. I hope somebody comes out with that or some clone of that in a phone app, even though I don't put phone apps games on my phone anymore. I haven't for a couple of years, but I might put it on my tablet and give it a little play or two before bed some nights or something. Party House, very cool within UFO 50. Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom is another honorable mention I have. I think it's very cool that they took the spirit of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, especially, where you can do a lot of experimentation with items in the world, and do that in a 2D Zelda where you actually play as Zelda, not as Link, and to be able to clone anything in the game. Not just one pot, but every flavor and design of pot that you see, every enemy that you see. And there's a lot of ways that you can quote unquote break the game by cloning different things and combining them together to solve puzzles. And there's things that don't seem like you should be able to do them that you can do to get to different parts of the games in different ways from what other players might be doing. Overall, I thought Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, it was definitely made more towards a younger audience than some of the Zelda games. Definitely was a little too easy. The puzzles just didn't feel that puzzly to me. I wish there was a little more meat on the bones there. It didn't keep me drawn through. It's the first Zelda game that I haven't finished, I think ever. I think it's the only one I haven't finished. And it's not as bad as like Spirit Tracks. In fact, I think it's a good game. It's just a little boring and too easy, but it's still fun as a sandbox to play around in. I think definitely if you have kids who are of the age where they would understand this game, that Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom on the Nintendo Switch would be a cool one. By the way, I played UFO 50 and Akimbot on Steam Deck. Another Switch game, Princess Peach Showtime. Now, I'm not really mentioning this for me, but I got this for my daughters, and they really enjoyed it. I think it's a very well made game. What I like about Princess Peach Showtime is that each level she's wearing a different costume, and they all have different powers. So every level is a little bit different in terms of how you have to play it and beat it. There are some where, yeah, you're baking cookies, but there's other ones where you got a sword and you're sword fighting. And I actually thought the boss battles in Princess Peach Showtime were quite well done and enjoyed those a lot. And I recommend that game if you've got daughters or sons, I guess. But if you've got somebody who wants to play this game again, it's another one that skews more towards kids. It's a little easy, but I think it's a very well made game. And I do recommend Princess Peach Showtime. I wanted to give it a shout out. Another game I played on Steam Deck is Kitsune Tales. This again is a retro inspired indie game that is essentially made as a spiritual successor to games like Super Mario Brothers 3. In fact, if you kind of saw it from a distance, you might think somebody was playing Super Mario Brothers 3. It's got the overworld, it's got the level design that's very similar, it's got sort of power ups that are very similar, but you play as lesbian foxes, which is whatever it is. It's an interesting take, but even though there is that little bit of story to it, on the whole, there's not that much of that. There's a village you go in where you can play some mini games and things, but really the reason to play Kitsune Tales is because of the nostalgic level design that I think is really well done, and it's just a fun platformer. And so I do recommend Kitsune Tales. And then my last honorable mention, which I also played on Steam Deck, is Nine Souls, and that's SOLS, Nine Souls. And this is a little bit Metroidvania, a little bit Souls-like, and it's definitely got a very heavy lean into the parry mechanic with some of the most brutal boss fights probably I've ever played in any game ever. It does have sliders for the settings where you can adjust things and sort of suit it to your taste, but at the base difficulty, very difficult game. I think if you like games like Hollow Knight, for example, you'll love this game. I think on the whole, it's actually better than a lot of Metroidvanias in the last several years that have gotten more recognition. I think just the timing of this game maybe didn't have a huge marketing budget, but Nine Souls, very fun game. Again, didn't finish it, didn't get super deep into it, but I enjoyed it quite a bit. Now we'll get into the actual rankings. So those are my honorable mentions. Number 10, college football 25. So we were all waiting for them to bring NCAA football back. I don't even know what year they made the last one. I want to say it was probably like 2013 or something. I don't know. It was a long time ago. Of course, there were issues held up in legal battles about whether the college football players can get paid and all those sorts of things for their likenesses. All that finally got settled, and we finally got an NCAA football game again this year. I never was big into Madden, but I always loved playing the college football games. I haven't followed football really since the pandemic in 2020. I kind of fell off and never got back into it. I've gone to a couple of games for my alma mater, Virginia Tech, but on the whole, I'm not like a hardcore football fan, but I like a good college football game. I just think it's a lot of fun calling the plays, doing the atmosphere, doing crazy things. College football 25 is okay. It's solid. It's probably the game on this list I put the most time into this year, actually, but I do think that it doesn't quite reach the mark that it needed to as a return to the franchise. After all these years, I expected a little bit more, some newness. I expected it to maybe play and look a little better. I just expected something a little more. Maybe that's on me, but I felt like whatever the last version was that I left off on before was actually a little bit more fun and played a little bit better. There's just some weirdness with football 25. The kicking is weird. The AI seems to be very rubber bandy, like almost unfairly rubber bandy, even on the like normal mid range difficulty. And I just find some real weird things to happen in terms of how zone defense plays as well in this game. I don't know, there's something that's a little bit off. It's fun. I enjoyed it. Obviously, it's my number 10 game of the year out of all the things I played this year, but it is at the bottom of my top 10 list just because it needs a little something something that's not quite there. But again, still fun. If you loved college football games back in the day, I mean, it's the one we have now, so you may as well pick it up. Number nine's Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. This is again a Metroidvania. I love Metroidvanias. And Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is a great one. You're exploring the map. You're doing your side scrolly combat thing. I think the combat is really great. I think the accessibility features in this game for the different flavors of combat and how you want to scale that are really excellent. And it's got a neat little story to it too. On the whole, I really liked a lot about Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. I couldn't finish it. I played this on Steam on my PC. I just and by the way, I played College Football 25 on the PS5. But Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, the save points are at these weird trees. I think they call them yak yak trees. And then those are not the fast travel points, though. They're like these different statues that are fast travel points, and they're just really spread out and makes traversal kind of feel stale and boring after a while and a little too slow when you know you just got to get to an area, but you can't really fast travel anywhere near there. And I frankly just fell off the game because I felt like it was kind of wasting my time. But I did enjoy it. I thought the combat was fun. I beat, I don't know, I think three bosses or something into it. And it was a cool game. I liked it. This is not to be confused. There's another Prince of Persia game that came out this year. I think it might still actually be in like beta or early access though, which is the roguelike Prince of Persia. It's not that game. We'll talk about that game maybe in 2025. We'll see. But this Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown game is great, and I do recommend it. I think just to go into it knowing that there's some weirdness with like the fast travel system, in my opinion. Number 8 on my list, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I loved Final Fantasy VII Remake. I only got maybe 5 or 6 hours into Rebirth, yet it's still pretty high on my list, up at number 8. I really want to go back to it someday, but I might end up just watching like the story on YouTube. I liked how the first part of Remake, Final Fantasy VII Remake, was linear. There were some hub areas, but it was mostly linear. I actually liked that as a more guided experience for that type of game. I love the action combat. I actually like that more than the traditional turn-based JRPG combat, which I know turns some traditional fans of Final Fantasy off, but especially Final Fantasy VII. For me, I like the combat. The combat is very fun. This game had so many side quests and the big open world areas, and I just kind of got into doing those and got distracted from the main quest. And then when I got back to the main quest, I kind of just the other things came out, other things came up in my life that I moved on to. And by the time I was able to get back to this, I was like, I don't even remember what I was doing in this game. Now it's been a month and I just never came back to it. Just too many things to play. There's just too many games out there. I get very little gaming time these days. I play, like I mentioned up at the top, I just don't play that much anymore. And I try to maximize my game time on playing things that I'm really enjoying and really invested in. And this game didn't quite do that for me because it was more open and it just felt kind of like one of those Ubisoft games where there's just a million icons on the map and it's just like do this, do that, do that, do that, and it's not a very focused experience. I prefer a focused experience, and this game didn't do that. If I was like a high school kid, like high school me or college me, this game would probably be number one on my list. There's just so much to do. It's dripping in Final Fantasy. The combat is fun, but it lands at number 8 for me this year. Number 7 on my list is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. This obviously just came out a couple of weeks ago. I'm liking it, not loving it. If it wasn't for how amazing of an Indiana Jones story it has, it might be better than at least 2, if not 3 of the movies. I probably would have put it down, but I love Indiana Jones, always have, always will. And the story here for an Indiana Jones story is great. The characters are great. The voice acting, Troy Baker nails a Harrison Ford 1939 era Indiana Jones voice. It's just perfect. And so I'm really loving many things about this game. The gameplay is a little slow. It's a little walking simulator kind of style for me. It's not what I expected. I think we all thought this might be a little bit more like Uncharted or Tomb Raider, even though it's in the first person. I actually think the first person perspective was just an atrocity. I think this game belongs in third person. It's got way too much platforming and different things to be in the first person. It just feels janky. I don't like it at all in terms of the camera perspective for this game. But I do like just the Indiana Jonesness of it and the fact that I'm like walking around in catacombs, exploring and picking up artifacts and solving puzzles. Although I'll say the puzzles in this game aren't great. Again, they're a little easy. They're a little just like walk to point A, grab a thing, put it on point B. There's not a lot of actual puzzle solving like you would get in some of the newer Tomb Raider games that I really enjoyed. Again, it's Indiana Jones. It's got some fun stealth combat. There's stuff to like here. There's a lot of stuff to like here. Again, it's number 7 on my list. I think it's a great game. I just don't think it's in my top 5. And I think one of the other problems that I have with it is it reminds me a lot of this studio's prior endeavor with Wolfenstein. I think I actually enjoyed the newer Wolfenstein games more. I think I enjoyed Dishonored a lot more, which this game also reminds me of because there's these kind of semi-open world hub areas that you go into that sort of are choose your own adventure in terms of how you approach things. But in Dishonored, I had all these cool powers and I could, fly and like call on armies of rats and all kinds of neat stuff. Indiana Jones can't really do anything except sneak around and bash Nazis in the head with candlesticks, which is pretty lame, honestly. I think there's a great game somewhere on the cutting room floor here, and I think they preserved enough of it to still be a really good time and to make it on number 7 for my list this year. But I'm curious to see if they do another one and sort of iterate on this a little bit because I think there's room for improvement, but I do enjoy it. Number 6 on my list is Astrobots. Astrobot on the PS5. By the way, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, playing that on PC with all the path tracing and all the fun super, or not super ultra wide, but ultra wide and path tracing and ultra settings and all that stuff. It looks beautiful. Playing that on my beefy GPU and or beefy GP, if you will, with 32 gigs of RAM also, and it runs great on PC via Xbox Game Pass for PC. But number 6 is Astrobot on the PlayStation 5. I feel like this game is hard to describe. I think it's another one where you have to have the nostalgia for it, specifically for the PlayStation brand and to have been coming along through PS1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I guess PSP and Vita to some extent too, because there's a lot of just callbacks and celebration of PlayStation itself in the Astrobot game, which is very cool to see. But it's a great platformer as well. That's just a lot of fun. It's just joy. It's just pure joy. There's colors everywhere. There's music popping off and cute little sound effects, and you're just doing something very quickly and very different in every level. You might be flying, you might be riding a jetpack, you might be growing these big, long punch bag arms and punching things. I mean, there's just a million things in this game, and I've only done, scratch the surface really of this game. I'm just getting through the second system. So you play in this galaxy that has multiple systems. I think there's 5 or 6, and then there's 5 or 6 planets within each one. So I've done, you know, 5 to 7 planets plus a couple of like secret planet areas at this point. There's a lot more to do. There's a lot of this game. They packed a lot in here. I do want to keep playing it. I don't think it'll move much further up on my list, even if I did, because of what's in my top 5. But I think Astrobot is great. I'm loving it. I'm having a ton of fun. I think it's just fun. It's not a hard game. There's no real challenge much to it, in my opinion. I think that's part of it. Is it's just like, I'm just exploring these areas and I'm just having fun and I'm walking around and rescuing little robots and I'm just chilling. Like it's just a relaxing game that does these cute little things that make you laugh, and it's just a lot of fun. It's just pure joy to play Astrobot, but it's not a type of game that's like, oh, I'm like really into this. I'm really using my brain or I'm really challenging myself. And that's why it's a little lower on my list, I think, but I do highly recommend Astrobot. I can certainly see why the Game Awards and many other media out there and different commentators and things put Astrobot as their game of the year. I can see that. I think that's totally a legitimate choice. Nothing against Astrobot. It's just not super high up my list, but that's my number 6 game. Now we get into the meaty stuff. Top 5. So number 5 for me is Helldivers 2. Helldivers came out early in the year. I think it had a lot of staying power. It's maybe not talked about as much here at the end of the year, but I think Helldivers 2 came out of almost nowhere. I mean, I played a lot of the original Helldivers, which I really like the original Helldivers perspective that was a top-down isometric shooter where you're multiplayer with a lot of people and you're doing the missions and fighting bugs and robots, and then you're getting extracted when the shuttle comes before your time is up on the mission and all those fun things. Helldivers 2 is just basically the same thing in a third-person game with all kinds of more weapons and power ups and levels and all those things. And it seems like it requires even a greater level of collaboration and communication with your teammates than the original Helldivers did. I played this with one of my buddies, Brad, quite a bit, as well as a few other folks, and really just loved Helldivers 2. I mean, I put a decent amount of time into this back at the beginning of the year when it came out and spent a few really good nights playing Helldivers 2. I enjoyed it a lot. I think that it's just one of those multiplayer experiences that comes out of nowhere almost where yeah, everybody kind of knew about it and folks who were familiar with the original Helldivers were excited to play it, but then it became, a sensation where it started to spread online where people were like, "Oh, this is really catching on," and like a lot of concurrent players started playing it all at once, and a lot of people jumped on the Helldivers 2 bandwagon, and it just became a really neat community too with the developers going online and really getting into character almost with how they toyed with gamers and things that they would allude to in blog posts and then release in the game and I think just the way that this game is treated as a live service game where it's got cool new missions and weapons and different things that get patched in over time as the community does different things and reacts to campaigns in the game is a very cool approach. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so high on my list because I think it's just an engaging experience that's just a lot of fun and it's fun to play with other people. Number 4 on my list, I haven't heard almost no one talk about this year. I don't know why. People love Path of Exile and they love Diablo and they love all of these other ARPGs that are out there. And yet, Last Epic comes out and like almost nobody's talking about Last Epic coming out this year. I still don't really understand why. And that's my number 4 game. I like Helldivers 2. I played Last Epic on PC on Steam. Of course, an ARPG. Almost, I mean, if you're not playing it with mouse and keyboard, come on, like that's the way to go. I love Last Epic. I mean, I love every ARPG that comes out. Give me some classes to choose from. Let me pick one. Let me craft my own skill tree along the way as I level up and create this cool, super customized character that lets me approach hordes of enemies in the way that I prefer and that I've built a skill tree around and give me that player control to try and experiment with different spells and different things and then go into dungeons and fight bosses and I'm just never not going to love that. Call it Grim Dawn, Diablo, Torchlight, whatever. Wolcen, there's a million of them out there. I think Last Epic actually is one of the best. I think it belongs in that upper echelon with some of those other names like Diablo. And I hope that by me mentioning it or whatever, that maybe a few more people will try Last Epic if you're really into ARPGs. One of my favorite genres for certain, and I really had a lot of fun with Last Epic this year. I again, it's another game where I feel like I just scratched the surface. I didn't spend much time with it, but it's a game where you could easily sink 100 hours, I think, into it and get a lot out of it. Number three on my list is Black Myth Wukong. Uh, I love Wukong. It's a really fun game. I have never really been big into the Souls genre of games, but what I like about this one is it's pretty linear and takes you on a path through these colorful, beautiful worlds that are so wonderfully illustrated. It's got really detailed characters who are all animals, of course, and they are kind of anthropomorphized animals, of course, and they're just all so well done. I mean, it's just an interesting game visually, and then it, unlike some of the other games in this genre, it's not so brutally difficult that you feel like you're beating your head against the wall. There is a parry mechanic, but there's dodging, and yes, the bosses are very, very tough, and you definitely will need 3 or 4 tries at least to beat each one, probably kind of learn their patterns and whatnot. But this game has so many spells and summons and fighting stances and a skill tree and weapon crafting. It's just so deep. There's so much that you can do and customize to your own fight style and try out and exploit bosses' weaknesses and different things with. I didn't beat it. I didn't beat it. I there's It's hard for me to have enough time to beat games these days, as much as I don't really play a lot. But I'm sure glad that I did spend several hours with Black Myth Wukong. Very, very fun. And of course, I knew Wukong from Monkey King from my Dota 2 days, and knew of the myth. And then my girlfriend told me a little more about Wukong and the importance of those stories in Chinese culture, and was actually the one who encouraged me to give the game a try. And I'm glad that she did because it was a fun, fun game. I really enjoyed Black Myth Wukong. I'd love to have time to go back to it sometime, and maybe one day I will. But it is one that requires a decent amount of time, and it's another one that I found very hard to go back to after taking a couple of weeks off because there are a lot of spells and combos and enemy patterns and things to sort of memorize in Wukong, and it feels like a game that you really need to commit to and play daily for a couple of weeks to really get good enough at it to have a lot of fun and beat it. So I didn't get to do that, but it's still, even with the small amount of time I feel I spent with it, I really it's still up at number 3 on my list. I really like Black Myth Wukong so much. Would encourage folks to give it a try. Don't be turned off by the fact it's kind of in that Souls genre, because I do not like those types of games at all, but I enjoy this a lot. And it's number 3 on my list. I played that on PlayStation 5. Home run here, or home stretch rather. Pepper Grinder. Pepper Grinder. I don't know how many people, I haven't heard a lot of people talk about Pepper Grinder. Another one that I played on Steam Deck, another little sort of side scroller 2D indie game where you essentially play as a little redheaded girl. No, it's not Celeste, although great game, love Celeste. But you have a drill, so it's sort of like if you remember Dig Dug from back in the day. It's like a really fast-paced Dig Dug with cool combat, and you're just drilling down into the ground, and you kind of ride on your drill, the momentum of it. So you're diving down into the dirt, and then you're sort of curving your control stick up to steer it up and like pop up out of the dirt, and then you can land back down in the dirt and just kind of like come up and get enemies and do different combos and things. And it's just very fast paced, and you're traversing the screen, of course, from left to right, 2D. And so you might have to like get momentum drilling down and then burst yourself up out of the dirt to have enough momentum to clear a jump and keep progressing in the level. And I just thought it was so fun. It's a short little game, which is absolutely perfect for me. I love a game that I can just pick up, have a lot of fun with, beat it in a weekend, and be done with it. I don't have to learn a bunch of complex stuff. I don't have to explore a big, enormous open world for 100 hours to get something out of it. I really love at the kind of place I am in my life to have these fun little focused experiences that are just pure joy to play and add a little bit of challenge to them. So I've got that sort of old school feel, and I love Pepper Grinder. I'm sure it's very cheap, probably on the Steam Winter Sale right now as I'm recording this, and very much recommend folks go give Pepper Grinder a try. And lastly, number one, my game of the year, my favorite game of the year for 2024 is Mini Shoot Adventures. Mini Shoot Adventures. I'll say that a third time so that you get it in your head and you go buy it because you probably haven't heard many shows out there and things talk about it. But Mini Shoot Adventures is just a tremendous game. I love it. I already want a Mini Shoot 2. I hope they do it. But you basically are playing a 2D Legend of Zelda game. So this is, in my mind, this is the best Zelda game that came out this year. Echoes of Wisdom I mentioned. This is way better. You're exploring an overworld map. You're going into dungeons and solving puzzles to open doors and access different areas and get to a final boss and fight it to get a power up. There's heart pieces hidden all over the map. There's all kinds of little secrets hidden all over the map. It's wonderful, but there's a catch. It's not just like a 2D Link to the Past style Zelda in that vein. It's also a bullet hell shmup or shoot 'em up game, like a shooter in the style of like an old Galaga or some Ikaruga or something to that effect. Although definitely not as hard as Ikaruga. Although I don't know, like some maybe if you don't collect enough of the power ups towards the end, I've heard folks have some trouble with some of those bosses, be very challenging. Personally, I got so into this game, I scoured the map, I got all the power-ups, I was adjusting my powers on the fly, which it allows you to do to put points into different powers, and then you can reset them and readjust them at anytime you want, free of charge in the game. There's no like in-game currency cost to do that. You're expected to adjust your powers to each situation that you're in, and I just love this game. There's so much packed in here. You are constantly, I mean, I'm talking every like 15 minutes, you're getting some new power up, like benefit, like a heart piece, new types of lasers for your ship, or some new other weapon, maybe as a speed power up, whatever. You're just always unlocking something in this game, and it's just so like these nice little hits of dopamine that like really hit that lizard brain thing where it's like, "Oh, I got this thing. I gotta go try it. Oh, hey, I got this other thing. I bet that'll let me like fly far enough off a ramp to get to that other thing I saw on the map before that I couldn't reach, and now I can." And you're just constantly uncovering and exploring. It does have. I don't want to spoil the game, but it's hard to not spoil it and really explain what it is. So I won't spoil anything, but I'll just say like it might look like this game only has a certain amount of areas and dungeons and boss fights and things, but that is very much like scratching the surface, and there's a lot more here than meets the eye as you keep playing. But even still, I think it's only about a 9 or 10 hour experience to 100% the game, which again, much like Pepper Grinder and a couple of the other things I've talked about, I love these very focused experiences that respect my time and don't require me to sink hundreds of hours into them. I can just spend a weekend or two, put a couple hours a day into them, and then go do something else, go to the gym, read a book, go for a hike, whatever, and pick it up and put it down on Steam Deck too. Everything about Mini Shoot Adventures was perfect for me. The form factor, the gameplay, the length of it, just everything. The difficulty. I love a game that is very challenging, but just up to that cusp of being frustrating, but not frustrating. And like Mini Shoot just checks all those boxes and lands that plane perfectly for me. So that is my game of the year for 2024, Mini Shoot Adventures. Real quick, I'll run down the list again. I won't do the honorable mentions again, but from number 10 on up, College Football 25, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, Astrobot, Helldivers 2, Last Epic, Black Myth Wukong, Pepper Grinder, and then my number one game of 2024, Mini Shoot Adventures. Go play it and have a great Christmas and a happy new year. And maybe I'll see you in about a year and we'll talk about 2025. And maybe then I'll only have a top 5 list because it feels like I just play fewer games every year, but it's still fun to talk about them. I still get joy out of experiencing what I do here and there. And I think it's a very cool medium, obviously, that's it's bigger than Hollywood and continues to grow. And I think there's a lot of creativity and storytelling and art and music and things in games that you won't find elsewhere from some really cool creators. And so I'm glad to still experience a little bit of it and get to be a part of it this year. And hope that you'll give some of these games a try. And let me know which ones you like. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And signing off for now for the World Map Podcast. This is Jay Dizzle.